day, aqua friends. We are going to do an owl today, and I am sort of on this kick of using this transfer film to block out a large area. So as you see here, I ended up taking the owl picture, bring it into Canva, getting rid of the background and just printing out the owl so that you could then trace it and bring it onto this transfer paper that will block out the area. So I decided to do something different for a fun background. I didn't really want much of a background, so I decided just to kind of like splash paint and just be a little bit wild with the background. Added a little bit of water. I just kind of want it really watery and just not much of a background. So once that dries, we take off the contact paper and you have to draw in all the details of the owl. Now I'm starting wet on dry and using Van Dyke Brown. I think I used a little bit of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, sepia, and neutral tint. If you guys are getting value out of this video and you like my artwork, please think about subscribing and hitting the notification button so that you don't miss any of the videos. I post every Tuesday. I'm building up that mid-tone around his face, and on the edges of the eye feathers there is a darker band that I'm filling in. Remember to start off light because you could always go darker, but it's harder to go lighter. Dropping in the burnt sienna. Using some yellow ochre, I'm getting in those beige feathers. He's kind of a striped owl, so I'm going over those same areas that I've already laid down, and those are kind of like my stripy areas that are mimicking the pattern that is on his feathers. I'm working wet on dry, but I'm also picking up lots of water as I go along, and some areas I am making them softer. Just kind of brushing some water over and letting the edges bleed together. So it's a combination of soft and hard edges that gives it a really neat texture. He's got a gorgeous yellow eye, and I am using ISO Yellow Deep for that by Holbein. Started off with some sepia for his beak, and using that sepia I am putting in like the shadowy, darker areas of his feathers. Taking water, I'm wetting where I want to put my paint next to have a more blended effect. I'm really building up this chocolatey feathers with the Van Dyke brown, layer by layer. The more feathers that I add, I am changing the value. And it's nice to change it slowly and build up these layers because you're adding value on top of another value, and you get a more natural, feathered look of these feathers when you have all these different layers built up. Instead of just slapping on, you know, the darkest colors you need right off the bat. It'll look flat, it will not look natural. It won't have any of the under layers shining through. The most important thing in this painting is going to be his eye and his beak. Starting to shade in the dark pupil, but you notice I don't just go for black right away for his pupil. I'm slowly building it up, and I'm preserving my whites for the highlights in his eye. If you don't like the disconnected look, if you have too much white space and you want the feathers to be more blended, what I'm doing here is going over all the area with a wet brush. It will soften the brush strokes and it will give it a more blended look. Starting off with the lightest green, which is my leaf green for the perch, and a burnt sienna on the end, and then dropping in sap green for this mossy texture while it's still wet. Adding in some browns with the green for the darker underside of the perch. This brighter green I'm using is Hooker's green, kind of a sort of a Christmassy green, but in the reference photo, this mossy perch that he's on is quite a vibrant green. And for more texture for that moss, I just hit the perch with some water. I just dripped some water onto the wet paint to make blooms. Now, with getting my highlights, I am using Dr. Martin's Opaque White with, it's like watered down. I'm using a script liner brush and going through and just getting some of those really light feathers in there. With some neutral tint, I'm drawing in my lines for the eye, for the rim of the eye and the pupil. So I'm adding some darker hues to the yellow because his eye is in the shadow on the top. You have like the eyelid that causes a shadow over the top of the eye. So it looks more realistic with that shadow in there. Now working on the beak, having to get that darker. This is going to take another layer, so once it dries, I'm going back over the same areas with the same color. And notice how going over that again is just making that eye pop forward. There's the money shot right there. Notice how dark I went there? That is just making that pop forward so much. So I'm always comparing. I'm like, okay, this is not as dark as it needs to be. And I was almost done with this and I thought, nope, I'm gonna go around that eye one more time. And boy, did that ever bring his face forward. And it all comes down to values. Values is the most important thing in painting. It's not about the color you use, it's about your values. Putting in the shadows under his belly, and I'm not going to put much detail in the feet. We want his face to be the center of attention, but I am putting in those claws. And that is it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Hope you give it a try and let me know in the comments below what you guys think. See you next week.